What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're talking our top 5 most undervalued wide receivers for this 2020 fantasy football season. These are the guys that you're going to want to target across all your leagues because they have great value and major blow-up potential and can be had at a pretty cheap price at this point in time. Before we get into it, however, a quick reminder, go ahead, check out the all-new and updated website at alldaypigskin.com and get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Great value. It's got everything you could possibly want. Top 150 overall player ranking, standard and PPR formats, individual player bios, tiers, and projections, along with general fantasy advice and more. So check that out now. All the details in the description. And if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. We kick off our list with one of the hottest wide receivers to conclude the 2019 season, and that is DeVante Parker of the Miami Dolphins. And weirdly enough here, usually you would see recency bias factor into an inflation of a player's ADP, considering how strong of a finish Parker had to the 2019 season, but that hasn't quite translated to his outlook for 2020. But when you go back and look at his performances, starting week 10, DeVante Parker had 6 major blow-up games that aided him in finishing as the wide receiver number 6 in standard formats and the wide receiver number 11 in PPR formats. He had over 1,200 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. Now, yes, the blow-up year for DeVante Parker has taken a while. 2019 finally proved to be that year. And there are some question marks on the Miami Dolphins, which partially could be the reason why DeVante Parker's ADP isn't quite on par with what you would expect a top 10 or top 12, top 15 wide receiver to be. But we believe that the Miami Dolphins, even with the drafting of Tua Tagovailoa, will have more quarterback consistency than last season. They will turn the offense over to Ryan Fitzpatrick for the majority of the year. Fitzpatrick is a quarterback that likes to air it out. The Dolphins are still a young team that is building on the defensive side of the football, which probably tells you that they're going to be playing from behind from time to time, maybe more so often than not, which will go ahead and result in a lot of passing opportunities. And DeVante Parker is that guy. Now, yes, there were injuries on this Miami pass-catching core, a la a Preston Williams, but DeVante Parker is the most proven commodity on this offense, and he really built a strong chemistry with Fitzpatrick last season. However, if you go ahead and look at the majority of platforms in terms of where DeVante Parker is being drafted, it's a little bit ludicrous. It's pretty consistently after the 4th round. If you go ahead and go by Fantasy Pros rankings, they currently have DeVante Parker outside of their top 25 wide receivers, which is a little bit crazy. Parker still has major value. I mean, in standard formats, we have him as a top 15 wide receiver. In PPR formats, we have him as a top 20 wide receiver. So pretty much across the board, he is beating those projections. He definitely has wide receiver 1 type of upside, but he's being valued as a low-end wide receiver 2. We've got him going for close to 1,100 yards, around 5 to 6 touchdowns, and between 70 and 80 receptions. That absolutely ticks the box for a top 15 wide receiver. So we go ahead and say, go and invest a pick in DeVante Parker. The Miami Dolphins might not be a sexy offense, but they do have a viable fantasy option there, and it is definitely DeVante Parker. Next up at number 2, we have got Odell Beckham Jr. And OBJ, probably the biggest name on this list, and it might be crazy to have him on a list of undervalued wide receivers, considering that only a few years ago, he was a perennial top-tier guy across all formats. But that's what 2020 is shaping up to be. What we have to answer is, can we go ahead and take advantage of this value, yes or no? And right now, we definitely believe we can, but let's look at some of the concerns and some of the upside. Starting with the concerns, 2019 was not a good year for Odell, definitely disappointing, because he finished as the wide receiver 31 and the wide receiver 25 in standard and PPR formats, respectively. barely had over 1,000 yards receiving. Definitely not what you paid for when you drafted him early in 2019. And it doesn't help that his teammate, Jarvis Landry, who was an afterthought compared to Odell, pretty much outperformed him in every single category that matters. But there are some other concerns on top of this. There's a lot of mouths to feed in Cleveland with Odell, with Jarvis, with Austin Hooper, David Njoku, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb. And speaking of Nick Chubb, this is an offense that looks to have a run-first mentality with the head coaches that they have added during this offseason. Also, will Baker Mayfield take that next big step? So yes, there are a lot of question marks, and Odell disappointed big time last season. Only 2 games with over 100 yards receiving, so we understand the question marks that are there. But let's look at the upside, because trust us, it does exist. Speaking of Odell Beckham, the biggest issue that he had last season is his health. He has come out and said that he played hurt. But heading into 2020, he's the healthiest he has been in a long time, and that's a good thing. On top of that, he still saw a good amount of targets during the season. He had 133 targets on the year, pretty close to what Jarvis Landry had, who I believe had 138. So for Odell, he was averaging around 8 to 9 targets per game. The issue is that Baker Mayfield didn't have enough time to get him the football. Really, any of his targets to football. But the Browns did a great job of upgrading the offensive line during free agency and during the NFL draft, which should give Baker much more time to find those aforementioned targets. A bonus for Baker Mayfield and for Odell Beckham specifically. And lastly, well, let's look at the ADP side of this, because right now, Odell is available in the 4th round, possibly even in the 5th round. And that screams wide receiver type 2 kind of player. But we know what Odell Beckham can be. He does have that wide receiver 1 upside. He's shown us that before. What's really honestly happening here is that, yes, Odell is a huge name, and that has led to him being overdrafted before. And with recency bias being what it is, people are trying to correct for that heading into 2020. But we have kind of taken it to the extreme. So for that reason, now Odell's value is lower than what it should be. So with that being the case, we urge you guys, go ahead, invest a 3rd or a 4th round pick in Odell Beckham. He still has that wide receiver 1 upside. He should improve pretty much in every single category in 2020 compared to 2019. Yards, touchdowns, receptions, you name it. He will have a bigger role in this offense. And for that reason, we are excited about OBJ to return to fantasy prominence in 2020 yet again. Next up at number 3, we've got T.Y. Hilton, who is in another intriguing situation because these last couple of years, admittedly, T.Y. was a bit overvalued considering that he had some consistency issues, that he did get hurt from time to time, and obviously last season with the retirement of Andrew Luck completely just throwing a different wrench into the situation. But T.Y. Hilton now heading into 2020 is in a much different scenario, especially with the addition of Phillip Rivers, but it seems like his ADP hasn't quite caught up to the situation itself, which screams value. Because let's look at the facts. And the facts are that T.Y. Hilton is still the wide receiver number 1 on this offense. He will be the top target for Phillip Rivers. He is one of the most experienced pass catchers on this offense. And compared to Jacoby Brissett, who was a stopgap game manager at best for the Indianapolis Colts, Phillip Rivers, even at his older age, had over 4,600 passing yards for the Chargers last season. Let's repeat that number, 4,600 passing yards. That's a huge number that's going to go ahead and maybe not wholeheartedly 100% translate into Indianapolis, but we expect Rivers to finish with over 4,000 passing yards again, and his addition to this offense will bring a new wrinkle into the Colts team, because last season it was mostly a run-first team. Now, yes, they've got a great offensive line and some good running backs, but with Phillip Rivers, he's got that pass-first propensity, and we think T.Y. Hilton will benefit. Now, yes, T.Y. has gotten hurt, but honestly, excluding 2019 and 2018, Ty went on a stretch of 3 years from 2015 to 2017 of playing a full 16 games. And we've seen him put up those wide receiver one type of numbers. In 2014, he had over 1,300 receiving yards. 2015, over 1,100 receiving yards. 2016, his big blow-up year, over 1,400 receiving yards. 2018, close to 1,300 receiving yards. So we know that he can get it done. Will there be inconsistencies? Yes. That's why he's not a surefire top-end wide receiver one, but he's also not a middle, low-end wide receiver two, which is where he's being drafted right now in the end of the 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th round from time to time. And we believe that that is an absolute joke, folks. You guys should absolutely reinvest in T.Y. Hilton. He's someone that's going to go ahead and return some of his value to what he was projected to a couple of years ago. We think he will get you over 1,000 yards receiving easily. He stays healthy, and the sky is the limit for him because the upside is great. Yes, there's some risk, but the reward outweighs the risk. Go ahead. T.Y. Hilton in the 5th round absolutely has wide receiver one type of potential, so go ahead and capitalize on that while you still can. At number 4, we've got Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans, and it seems like that we're trying to shove down Brandin Cooks down your guys' throat at every chance we get, but honestly, it's because we believe in him to that extent. And there's a couple things to address here, and let's start with maybe the biggest, because everyone will mention the concussions. Yes, Cooks doesn't scream confidence when drafting him because last season with the Rams, he had 2 instances of concussions. The second time around, he missed time due to it. And as we all know, with concussions in the NFL, once they start to pop up, they linger, and the next one usually brings an even longer period of absence. But what we do have to consider right now, as is the case with fantasy football always, is Cooks is currently healthy, so we have to project him to play a full 16 games. Yes, we also acknowledge that he is the riskiest name on this list, so we're not going ahead and just burying that. No, that's not the case, and in large part, it's why he's available close to those double-digit rounds, but also consider that there is probably the biggest gap between Brandin Cooks in terms of where people have him currently ranked to what his potential is. Because prior to last year, Brandin Cooks had 4 straight years of 1,000+ yards receiving. And all of a sudden now, he's not even regarded as the number 1 wide receiver on his own team. That's continuously Will Fuller across all formats by pretty much every single quote-unquote expert. But if you think about it, this guy, Will Fuller, that everyone is hyping up, he's been more injury prone than Brandin Cooks. He has never, Will Fuller, played a full season in his entire NFL career. And let's also acknowledge that one DeAndre Hopkins, a perennial top 5 wide receiver, is no longer a part of this offense, which means there will be a lot of targets freed up. And in fact, if you look at the stats, DeAndre Hopkins accounted for 33% roughly of the targets that Deshaun Watson had last year. And a lot of those will go the way of Brandin Cooks. Yes, he's got other wide receivers to contend with. Will Fuller, who we've touched on. Kenny Stills, who also has had some injury concerns. Randall Cobb, who is heading into his 10th NFL season on his 2nd team in 2 years. And also Kiki Kuti, who again also dealt with injuries last season. In fact, this entire wide receiver group has their own fair share of injuries. So from that perspective, if you want to go with the guy with the highest upside, the guy that's the youngest, also the most experienced, and with proven production, that is Brandin Cooks, folks. And right now, he's being drafted as a wide receiver number 3. It's not crazy to see him being available in the 10th round in auction drafts with values like $2, $3, $4, something like that. He is an absolute steal across all formats. We believe that he is the actual wide receiver to target for this Houston offense. And for us, he's going to finish with close to 1,000 yards and should absolutely beat all current projections and finish much closer to a high-end wide receiver 2 than the wide receiver 3 that he is currently projected for. And finally, coming in at number 5, we've got Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots. And it's crazy how quickly things change, because if we recorded this video a couple weeks ago, Edelman would be on our do not draft list. But now, after the signing of Cam Newton, things absolutely changed in the blink of an eye, because as soon as that happened, we had to go into our 2020 draft guide and update Edelman's projections. And just by that one signing, Edelman now has seen his value pretty much increase by 10 spots in PPR formats alone, where he should definitely be prioritized in those leagues. But let's talk about Edelman in 2019, because he was a huge success story. In fact, we were singing the praises of Edelman as someone that you should absolutely target, especially in PPR formats, hell, across all formats, because he was undervalued last year. He would be the by far number one option for Tom Brady. He would see so many targets. He would get all the receptions, and he would easily get over 1,000 yards receiving, and we believed in him staying healthy. And wouldn't you know it, he played a full 16 games, he had 100 receptions, and he had over 1,100 receiving yards. You know what that translated to? That translated to a wide receiver 13 finish in standard formats and a wide receiver 7 finish in PPR formats. Well, Tom Brady left, and afterwards we were extremely low on Edelman, naturally. We don't really have all that faith in Jarrett Stidham. He's an unproven commodity. But with Cam Newton now joining those ranks, well, a lot of those truths that we were saying about Edelman in 2019 kind of hold true in 2020 as well, because again, he becomes a viable option, the number one option. In fact, we believe he will lead the Patriots offense in receptions and receiving yards, and he should have potentially top 15, top 20 upside in PPR formats. But again, his ADP hasn't quite adjusted to the situation. And Edelman will definitely be a wide receiver that sees his ADP gradually increase and increase as we get closer to the season, as people start to realize, oh yeah, well, Edelman's projection for 2020 is maybe going to be pretty similar to 2019. Sure, there might be a little bit of a dip because we don't know if Cam will stay healthy for the entire season. Have to factor in that to some extent, whether he starts the season as the quarterback. We don't know what that'll happen, but the fact remains is Edelman is still the guy in New England. The addition of Cam Newton, a proven bona fide quarterback that can go ahead and sustain a wide receiver number one, means that Edelman is yet again someone you should be targeting. Right now, you're going to see him maybe in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, whereas he should probably be drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, especially in PPR formats. So with that, we wrap up this look into our top 5 most undervalued wide receivers for 2020. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? What other wide receivers are on this type of list for you that you will be targeting across all formats, along with any other fantasy questions you guys might have? And like we mentioned before, go ahead, check out the all-new and updated website at alldaypigskin.com. Get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. All the details in the description. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, we'll see you guys in future videos.